Tantor Audio, a division of recorded books, presents Highland Renegade by Cynthia Breeding, narrated by Chris Macdonnell. Chapter 1. Scotland, July 1774. "I do not understand why you were taking us into barbarian country," Juliana Caldwell complained as their carriage hit a rut in the road and rocked precariously. "We could very well get killed," her sister Lorelei agreed, grabbing a side strap to keep from slipping off the seat. Emily, Countess Woodhaven, shook her head at her younger siblings. "Scots do not go around murdering innocent women." "No," Lorelei sniffed. "I heard they are lawless cattle thieves." "And I heard they steal women and force them to marry," Juliana added. Emily put her fingers to her temple and rubbed, hoping to forestay a headache that was already forming. They had been on the road from London for 6 days, and her sister's admonishments had grown more stark with each passing day. At first they had been upset about leaving London and not retreating to a country estate. Not that they had a country estate any longer, but as they'd travelled north, their agitation had grown more dire. Yesterday they had passed over the border at Gretna Green, and the landscape had become rockier as they travelled towards Stirling. Looking out the windows at the increasingly barren terrain had sparked another deluge of anticipated horrors. She certainly wasn't going to admit that she also felt a bit of trepidation. "Would you rather have been taken into the convent?" she asked. That quieted both of them, and she felt a bit guilty over using the threat, but it was true. They had no other place to go. Albert Prescott, the Earl of Woodhaven, her recently deceased husband, had had a penchant for gambling and opium that had left her with a mountain of debt after his death. Creditors had circled like sharks scenting blood, not to mention a mistress the old lecher had apparently had for years, all wanting money. She'd sold the house in Mayfair to pay off the debts, but not the mistress. The country estate was entailed, and a cousin who had claimed the title didn't feel charitable about housing a widow and 2 young, attractive women. Or maybe it had been his wife, the new countess, who didn't. Either way, they no longer had a home. "We are sorry," Lorelei said, her voice subdued. "You are doing what you think best for us." Juliana nodded. "We would truly die if we had to live in a convent. Or take the veil," Lorelei shuddered. Emily had to smile at the idea of either of them retreating into silence and prayer. At 17, Lorelei was vivacious and a natural flirt. Juliana, a year older, was wilful and opinionated. "I doubt the nuns would even consider such a thing." Lorelei's expression grew wistful. "We just wanted a season like our friends." Juliana gave her a sharp look. "I told you not to bring that up." "It's all right," Emily said. "If things go the way I hope they will, you can both return to London for next year's season." While Lorelei's face brightened, Juliana shook her head. "I do not care if I have a season or not. What is the point? To marry someone who will try to control me? I will not be forced into that." "Like I had been." "You should not bring up Em's marriage either," Lorelei said accusingly. "It's all right," Emily said again. "It does not matter now." Initially she'd had no choice. When their parents had been killed in a carriage accident 5 years ago, her father, Baron Caldwell, had very little in his bank account. Ever the hopeful entrepreneur, he'd sold his land to invest in new inventions, always telling them that the latest one was sure to be a success, and they would soon have money to burn. When the Earl of Woodhaven, 40 years her senior, had come calling afterward with his proposal of marriage as well as the offer to take in her sisters, she hadn't seen how she could refuse. She'd been only 10 and 9, with no idea of the man's rotten soul. But that was in the past. Through some miracle, or perhaps because King George had a passion for science himself and had met her father several times, he'd seen fit to petition Parliament for a special dispensation awarding her the land title to forfeited holdings in Scotland that had belonged to the outlawed Clan MacGregor. She had decided, like Juliana, that no man was ever going to control her again. She was determined to handle the land operation herself. She had been advised that some MacGregors still occupied the land, courtesy for not having fought at the Battle of Prestonpans nearly 30 years ago. She suspected King George also allowed them to stay, partially because his mother's confidant was Lord Bute, a Scotsman whose estates were near Glenstray. However, she had also been told after receiving the land deed that she was within her rights to have the clan vacate the land. From the records she'd seen, the holdings didn't seem to be doing well. The profit wasn't much, but Emily was determined that would change. She would need someone's help in learning everything about successfully managing the land. She'd decided she would simply explain that she intended to be accommodating and allow the clan to stay. The situation would be beneficial to all of them. Emily smiled at her sisters and leaned back against the squab. "Everything is going to be fine. You will see." Ian MacGregor watched incredulously from the battlements of Stray Castle as a carriage followed by 5 wagons made their way up the perilously steep, winding road that led to his home. The carriage must belong to the Countess of Woodhaven, but by the devil's own horns, how long did the old dowager plan to stay? He knew his lands, MacGregor lands, had been annexed by the Crown and sequentially leased to an earl years ago, simply because his father had refused to change his surname. He had refused to do the same when his father died. MacGregors were the purest branch of Gaels in Scotland, descended directly from the Albionis. Their motto wasn't, "My race is royal," for nothing. That their name and the clan itself was still considered banished by the English government made no sense. The grievances that had impelled Queen Mary to issue the edict were long past. Hopefully Lord Mountstuart would be able to persuade the present monarch to restore their rightful name and place in history, and soon. Ian wanted to start the process of gaining back the legal right to his lands. MacGregor lands. Meanwhile, there was this. He squinted at the caravan plodding its way closer. He'd received notice a fortnight ago from the local magistrate that the widow of the Earl of Woodhaven had decided to visit. The Earl had been in his mid-60s, and Ian had no idea why his wife, who had to be close in age, would make the trip all the way from London. He'd been careful in the reports he had to make to the Earl's estate to undervalue both the crops and livestock, so the Englishman wouldn't come snooping up here. Now it seemed the old dowager had decided to come sniff around. He grimaced when he looked at the line of wagons. She wouldn't need to unpack any of it. He'd already come up with a plan, aided by his brothers and uncles, to make sure her visit was neither comfortable nor accommodating. The grimace turned to a smile. She'd soon be wishing for a return to the luxuries of London. Turning, he made his way down the steps and across the bailey to the massive front door, where his sister Fiona, his ward Glenda, and 3 of his brothers awaited him. He had no idea where Devon might be, but no one ever knew where his 4th brother was most of the time. "You must have heard the noise of them approaching," he said. "Aye," his brother Carr answered. "Sounds like a cavalry unit coming," his other brother Alistair added. "Why would they be bringing so many wagons?" Fiona asked, her eyes growing round as the whole line came into sight. Rory, his 3rd brother, snorted. "'Tis just like a woman, thinking she cannot exist less she changes her gown every 5 minutes. Ian had an uneasy feeling those wagons didn't contain just clothes, but he kept his thoughts to himself as he watched the carriage come through the open arch of the gateway. The portcullis always stayed up these days, and the drawbridge down, since Scotland was not at war, but for a brief moment he almost wished he had barred the entrance. Then he shook his head. He was 29. It was ridiculous to let some little old lady intimidate him. The carriage finally rolled to a stop in front of them. Ian motioned for a groom to open the door and assist the woman down. He had no intention of paying homage, but Highland ways did call for hospitality, at least initially. His eyes widened as a girl stepped down who couldn't be any older than Fiona. Except where his sister's hair was as black as his own, this one's was pale as moonlight. Her eyes had a silvery cast that made her look almost otherworldly. He caught Alistair, who always had an eye for the ladies, staring, and gave him a poke. Probably a daughter. Then another one stepped out whose hair was the coppery colour of sunset. She looked around, her ginger-coloured eyes practically snapping as she frowned. "Looks like she wants to pick a fight," Rory grunted. "Women should nae argue with a man." Fiona shot him a look. "You dinna do so well keeping me quiet." "Probably another daughter," Ian interrupted before a real fight did break loose. At least that might explain the need for a lot of gowns. Even though Fiona preferred breeches, he knew most young women didn't. "How many children do you think the Dowager has?" Carr, ever the analytical one, asked as a third woman stepped down. "I dinna ken." Ian's breath caught. This last one looked like an angel descended from heaven. Her hair was like spun gold, her complexion like fresh cream, and her eyes a deep blue that reminded him of Loch Orr on a cloudless day. He found himself moving forward in spite of planning to wait at the steps. "I am Ian MacGregor, He'd almost said laird, but since the word was banned, by the English at least, and he didn't need to stoke any English fires, one in charge here. The missive I received didn't say the Dowager would be bringing 3 lovely daughters." He smiled at her, then peered inside the carriage, which was empty. "Where is your mother?" "Resting in peace beside my father," the angel answered. Even her voice sounded heavenly, clear and melodious as the harp strings being plucked. Then the words registered. He drew his brows together. "Your mother is nae with ye?" One golden brow arched. "It would seem not." He suddenly felt like a green lad, or at least a dolt. Of course her mother wouldn't be here if she was dead, but what the devil? He straightened to his full height and squared his shoulders. "Where is the Dowager Countess of Woodhaven?" Her lips curved in the slightest of smiles, and he noticed how full and lush they were. "Very kissable, mayhap. I am she." It took a moment for those words to sink through his rapidly lustful thoughts. Then he blinked. "Ye are the Dowager?" She nodded. "I am Emily Woodhaven. These are my sisters, Miss Lorelei Caldwell." She gestured to the blonde, then to the redhead. "And Miss Juliana Caldwell. But I thought, I dinna—" He stopped himself before he sounded even more like an Egypt. "We were nae expecting 3 lasses." "Do not worry about accommodations." Emily pointed towards the wagons. "We brought our own beds." He frowned. Did the woman think that a MacGregor could not offer a bed, accommodations? His mind didn't need to be thinking of beds right now, or the pleasures to be found in one. He turned his gaze to the wagons instead. "What else did you bring?" "Just the things that are valuable to me and my sisters. I am sure it will all fit into a room or 2 at the most." His frown returned. "But why? You'll just be staying long enough to see the property, aye?" "Well, no." She looked at her sisters, then back to him. "We plan to live here." "What?" He heard the words spoken in unison behind him where his brothers lingered. She glanced at them, then opened her reticule to withdraw a document and took a deep breath. "I am sure you will find everything in order," she said as she handed him the papers. "This is the title deed. I am the new owner here." For the space of a full minute Emily could have heard a needle drop on the soft ground. No one spoke. But then they probably didn't have to. The stunned looks on the faces of the men behind Ian slowly changed, and she could almost see a dark cloud building over their heads. The cloud could have been her overactive imagination, since the 3 men and the 1 girl all had raven black hair. The younger girl had lighter brown hair. The men's eyes, narrowed at the moment, ranged from blue to green to hazel. As she tried not to overtly stare at them, they seemed to increase in size, which was already formidable, both in height and width of shoulders. Emily tore her gaze away and looked up at Ian defiantly, up being the operative word, since he was even taller and broader than his brothers. She was not exactly short herself at 5.5 feet, but she barely came to his shoulder. She squared her own and refused to look away. It was only then that she noticed the unusual golden colour of his eyes, like a wolf's, and he was eyeing her as a wolf might its prey. She could almost feel the tension in his body, as though all those muscles were coiled and ready to spring. A sudden scraping sound nearly caused her to jump. Then she realized he had crumbled the papers in one large fist. Perhaps announcing that she was the new owner could have waited, given that his face looked like it were chiselled out of stone. She took another deep breath and hoped her voice wouldn't shake. "Were you not informed about the deed?" For a moment she didn't think he was going to answer. "Nay, I wasna." It sounded like a growl, and for a brief second she wondered if there was any truth to the myth of werewolves. She gave herself an inward shake. If nothing else, she had to appear brave for her sisters, who for once were silent and watching her. Nor would it do to show fear in front of the MacGregors. She'd learned that much from her husband. She lifted her chin. "I'm sorry you were not informed." She gestured to the crushed papers. "That copy of the deed should make it quite clear once you read it." He made a sound that was definitely a growl this time, and she forced a smile. "But do not worry. I have no intention of asking you to leave." This time she distinctly heard a series of growls from the group behind Ian and swallowed hard. Somehow she managed to keep the smile pasted on her face. "In fact, I would like to ask your help in teaching me to manage this holding. That should be to all of our benefits, do you not think?" For a moment he stared at her with an expression between wary and cautious, as though he might be dealing with someone not quite sane. Then he turned to his brothers, and all hell broke loose as they started shouting in Gaelic and gesturing wildly. Emily tried not to cringe. This wasn't turning out exactly as she expected. Chapter 2. "What do you propose we do?" Rory asked yet again. "Damned if I can." Ian poured a dram of whisky, drained it, and leaned back in the leather chair behind the massive desk in the library. The brothers had retreated there as soon as Maggie, their housekeeper, had taken charge of the Sassenachs. The idea had been to plan strategy, but so far none of them had come up with anything. They just kept shaking their heads as though they'd all been clouted with the hilt of a claymore. "I will ask our solicitor to make sure the papers are legal," Carr said. "'Tis the king's seal on them," Ian replied bleakly, then pushed the crumbled sheets across the desk. "Look for yourself." Carr smoothed the papers and glanced at them before folding them neatly to tuck into his shirt. "Still, we want to make sure." "That doesna solve the problem," Rory grumbled. "Those women want to live here." "Well, it wouldna be so bad to look on the one called Lorelei," Alistair said with a chuckle. "She's very bonny." Rory snorted. "You think all women are bonny." "Well, they are." Alistair didn't seem the least bit affronted. "But you have to admit that one looks like the fairies sent her, with her pale hair and silvery eyes." "More apt, the demons sent the other one," Rory said. In spite of the dire situation, Ian grinned. While Maggie had been leading the women into the castle, one of their wolfhounds had enthusiastically tried to make Juliana's acquaintance. Unfortunately, he had barreled into her from behind, causing her to stumble and fly forward like a leaf in the wind. Rory had, by instinct, leapt forward too, catching her before she'd sprawled on the ground. She'd been furious by the time he'd set her back on her feet, whether from embarrassment or the guffaws from his brothers, or both. She'd offered a string of English curses that would have been hard to rival. "Well, you did hold her a wee bit longer than necessary," he said. Rory scowled. "Only to teach the lass a lesson that they dinna have free rein. The MacGregors are in charge here." "We hope," Carr said. "Aye," Ian responded before Rory could argue the point. "Assuming the deed is legal, the Countess could make our lives miserable." "Which is what I thought we were supposed to do to her," Rory replied. "Wasn't that the original plan?" Aye, but that was when we thought she would just be visiting and the leasehold was still in effect. I dinna ken that is the best thing to do now." Rory eyed him suspiciously. "Are you having a change of mind because the old dowager isna quite so old?" "And bonny," Alistair added. "Nay." Ian realised his overly quick denial belied the fact. It didn't help when Alistair and Carr both grinned at him. His face warmed like a green lad when he thought of where she was right now, probably soaking in a bath, her naked body all pink from the warmth of the water. Then he remembered his instructions and which room she'd been given and where it was. His conscience niggled at him. With an effort he dismissed it and returned to his fantasy of her bathing. He hadn't had a chance to glimpse much of her other than her face with its lush, kissable lips, since she'd been wearing a travel pelisse that had covered most of her. Was she— He shifted in the chair, aware that his breeches had grown tighter. "'Tis a fine line we walk right now." Carr inclined his head. "We might need to reconsider, since she could send us all packing." "Dunna be an arse." Rory frowned at both Carr and Ian. "And dunna tell me you're thinking of welcoming them." "Nay, but—" Ian held up his hand before Rory could retort. Carr was right. They couldn't just make life miserable now for 3 young women. "Mayhap alter the plan a bit. We can still make sure the lasses are shown how hard life can be here, but we can also impress on them what good stewards we are, so they'll ken there is nothing to worry about when they go back to London." "How soon will that be?" Rory asked. From the way his body was reacting to Lady Woodhaven, the sooner the better. What he didn't need was to get involved with her. Apart from the fact that she must be very manipulative, how else had she been able to secure the deed in her own name? And she'd chosen to marry a man near old enough to be her grandfather, no doubt for his money and title, but his clansmen would consider him a traitor if he colluded with a Sassenach countess. These were MacGregor lands, regardless of what an English king decreed. His duty to his clan, who did exist regardless of legal proclamations, was to hold the lands for his kin, just long enough to assure the countess that everything is being managed well, and she can count on her profits being sent to London on a regular basis. "I think that's a good idea," Carr said, "but Devon willna like it." He probably wouldn't. Their younger brother hated anything to do with the English. He'd even offered to make sure the old dowager didn't enjoy a single day when she visited. Who knew what he would do once he learned of the new situation? Ian sighed. "We will just have to deal with that when he returns." "And what about our uncles?" Rory asked. "They're due to arrive in a day or 2. They'll nae be pleased either." Probably not, but at least they wouldn't be as obvious about their feelings as Devon. Donovan and Broderick had taken the surname Murray and were thus able to move more freely in both English and Scottish society, but that didn't mean they were more likely to want an English countess here. Ian heaved another sigh and reached for the bottle of whisky on the desk. He would have to handle one crisis at a time. Emily, along with her sisters, followed the middle-aged housekeeper, Ian had called her Maggie, into the castle and up a winding, narrow flight of stairs. Besides issuing a terse, "Follow me," the woman hadn't said a word, nor did she pause in the entryway to give Emily a chance to look around. She'd gotten only a glimpse of a large room beyond double doors to the left and a single door to the right that was closed, before they'd ascended the stairs. When they'd crossed an actual drawbridge and approached what looked like a truly medieval castle, Emily had felt a twinge of excitement. It had a thick crenellated curtain wall surrounding it, with merlons and embrasures, and she could picture archers posed along the battlements, bows drawn, ready to do battle with any enemy that approached. The castle itself was an imposing square granite structure, several stories high, with round towers at each end. It was like walking into the world of several centuries ago. And maybe she had. Inside, the walls were stone, and a wooden staircase they were climbing spiralled upward, with uneven steps and no railing to hold on to. She'd read in a history book that they'd been deliberately built that way so invaders would have a hard time brandishing a sword while keeping their balance. "This looks primitive," Lorelei whispered. "I hope there are no bats in the rafters," Juliana replied. "Shh," Emily hissed at them. The last thing they needed was to insult the housekeeper and, by extension, the MacGregors who were their hosts. But the woman didn't appear to have heard. Still, the meeting outside had not been exactly cordial, and they didn't need to ruffle anyone's feathers. Her sisters said no more, but perhaps that was due to the effort of climbing. Maggie didn't pause at the first landing, but continued up another flight of stairs to the second floor. Then she led them through what seemed a maze of dark interior hallways, lit only with candles stuck in wall sconces. Finally she stopped in front of a door at the end of the hall. Pushing it open, she looked at Emily. "This is the room the laird made ready for ye." She glanced at Lorelei and Juliana. "I'll have the room across the hall aired for them." "Thank you." Emily shot her sisters a warning look. The lack of addressing her properly with "my lady," especially when the housekeeper gave Ian the respectful term laird, even if it was banned by the English, wasn't a point she wanted to argue at the moment. "Could we have some water brought to tidy up a bit?" Lorelei asked. "There's water in the pitcher there." Maggie pointed to the dresser. "And a basin beside it." Again Emily gave her sisters warning looks. "That will be fine." The housekeeper gave a curt nod, then stepped back and shut the door, leaving the three of them alone. Emily looked around the room. Besides the dresser there was a small table and 2 chairs by a very narrow window, probably an arrow slit, she realized, a single bed, a wardrobe against one wall. There was also a screen behind which she hoped was a chamber pot. A large hearth took up most of the remaining wall. Logs had been laid but not lit. At least she wouldn't be cold later. "That woman is horrible," Lorelei said, interrupting her thoughts. "She certainly would not find herself employed in any London household," Juliana added. "I doubt that she would want to be," Emily retorted. "And we were warned that Scots could be taciturn, so we will just have to adjust to her personality." "And what about the men?" Juliana asked. "They were rude as well." Lorelei giggled. "But you have to admit they were all very good-looking." Juliana rolled her eyes. "Is that all you ever think about? They were rude." Her sister stuck out her tongue. "You're just angry because you tripped and one of them caught you." "Caught me? He held me and wouldn't let go." Lorelei grinned. "I would not mind being held by an attractive man." Juliana frowned. "I felt like his bloody captive." Emily frowned too. "You might want to check your language. I'm sure you have already created quite an impression with the litany you loosed in the Bailey." "Huh!" Her sister folded her arms defiantly. "Please, Juliana, for me, for us," Emily said. "From what we witnessed outside, the MacGregors did not seem to have been warned that King George had actually transferred the deed instead of holding it. That had to have been a shock. We do not need to be alienating our reluctant hosts." "I can try." Juliana lowered her arms, looking somewhat mollified. "Just do not expect me to act like some sweet, demure, biddable lady." Emily began, but was interrupted by a knock on the door. Maybe the housekeeper sent up some hot water after all. Lorelei went to open the door, only to stare at the girl who had been in the courtyard earlier. "May I come in?" she asked. "Certainly." Emily moved forward, but not before she pinched Juliana's arm. "Please, we have never been introduced, since my brothers are all idiots." "Idiots." She smiled at all of them. "I'm Fiona." They reintroduced themselves, and Juliana, taking care to stay out of Emily's arm's reach, added, "I agree with your assessment of your brothers." Fiona laughed. "Oh, well, you took the wind out of their sails. Had them in irons, you did." "Irons?" Lorelei asked. "None of them were shackled." "Not that that would have been a bad idea," Juliana said. Fiona laughed again. "Sometimes I would like to see it as well. They can be a wee bit bossy, all of them. But I meant, when you take the wind out of sails suddenly, the boat stops dead in the water and canna make headway. 'Tis what in irons means." She looked at the puzzled faces. "We do a lot of sailing on..."
Sample complete. Ready to continue?